It's the first time her son's hugged her in 6 years, so hey, we'll take it. Well, good morning. I'm going to start today with one warning and then a terrible story. The warning is this is one of those lessons that gets to the very real. This is us when we're willing to admit it. And if you want to pretend you're all great and fine, you have my permission to just tune out or leave. But this is one that if it doesn't drag on you, then they've got a word for that, denial, okay? Now, the bad story. And this is a true one. The lady, it was over a course of 3 days. The first day she had to pack all of her goods that she was going to get to take with her, that she got after the divorce, because she was having to leave the house that she loved. The next day they came and they loaded it all up, what she got to take, and it was gone. And the third day, she sat down at her beautiful dining room table that she loved so much, and she had her last meal in that house, and she intentionally chose shrimp and caviar, go figure. And once she had finished eating it, she went around then and took a little piece of half-eaten shrimp and some caviar in it to every room in the house and put them in the hollow ends of the curtain rods. And then she cleaned up the kitchen, and she left. The next day, her ex-husband and his new young thing, his new girl, came to the house, and they settled in because he got the house and the settlement, and he's so excited about that. But it wasn't long, of course, before something smelled in that house. They tried everything. They cleaned, they mopped, they aired out the place. The vents were checked for dead rodents. The carpets were cleaned. The air fresheners were hung everywhere. They even called exterminators to fumigate. Finally, they paid to replace a very expensive carpet that they had, but nothing worked. Nothing worked. And people stopped coming over to visit, and repairmen refused to come to the house. The maid they had absolutely quit. Well, they couldn't take the stench any longer, and they decided they had to move. But a month later, even though they'd cut their price basically in half, nobody wanted that house. They couldn't. It was terrible. It was stinky, and word got out, and eventually even the local realtors would not return their phone calls. It was terrible. And finally, they went down to the bank. They borrowed a huge amount of money so they could buy another house to live in it. Well, about that point, the ex-wife called, just checking on you, see how you're doing. And he told her the saga of the rotting house, and she listened politely and said, I miss our old home. You know what? I'd be willing to make an adjustment to our divorce settlement if I could have the house. Well, knowing his ex-wife had no idea how bad the smell was, he agreed on immediately, price of about 1/10 of what the house was actually worth, but on one condition, she had to sign the paperwork that day. And so she said, sure. So sure enough, got the lawyers, got the paperwork over to her, signed it, and a week later, the man and his girlfriend stood smirking as they watched the moving company pack everything to take to their new home, including the curtain rods. There's something about that story. I told you it was horrible. There's something about that story that you want to go, that girl, you got it. Oh, man, good for you. She got even, right? But be careful, because I need to warn you something. That feeling that you get, that good feeling of a story, that story like that engenders, is one of the major weapons that yet another one of those giants uses to sneak in and destroy our lives. Today we return to our series, Conquering Your Giants. Our premise has been that we all face giants in our lives, and by that we mean that there are those things that just seem to loom so large, and they get between us and all the plans and the promises and the things that God has for us. For some people, that giant's a problem that just won't go away. For others, it's a person who grinds us down, just grinds us down. For others, it's a pain that has tormented your body or your mind. And still for others, it's a past. Something in the past that has plagued our hearts and our souls. But we all face those giants, that's my point. We all face them, and they get between us in that life of overcoming, that life of victory that God said He promised us. The question is not whether we are going to face these giants. The question is whether we're going to conquer them or be conquered by them. Do you get that? You're going to face these. And that's why I said we got to be real and say, yeah, I face that. We're going to face them. The question is not whether we're going to face them. The question is whether we're going to conquer them or be conquered by them. Theme verse for our whole series has been 1 Corinthians 15, 57. Thanks be to God who gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. The promise of God's word is that Jesus is bigger than any giant you face, so you can overcome and you can conquer in Jesus' name. And so what we did is we began this whole series by looking at how to conquer giants, the basics, by looking first of all at the very first and most famous giant in all of Scripture, and that was the giant of who? Who do we look at first? Goliath. And some basic principles on how to conquer a giant, no matter what that giant may be. But then we looked at the account of the giants of Gath, the family from which Goliath had come, as a way to look at what I called the giant that seems to be behind the other giants, fueling them. And we said that was the giant of fear. And we all face that at times. And then we looked at what Jesus teaches us about a giant he called Mammon, which I call the biggest giant on so many blocks, and that's the giant of the money and the financial troubles that we have. And then last time we looked at what the first giants that showed up in the Bible, the Nephilim. We looked at the first one as a way to talk about the first giant that tends to show up in most all of our blocks, and that's the giant of anger. Well, today I want us to look at another one of the major giants that attacks so many of us, and I promise you it's attacked probably every one of us in this room. And that's a giant that, to explain this one, I want you to listen to the words of Amos in the Old Testament, a prophet. Because the Lord was speaking through the prophet Amos to the people about yet another giant in the land that they had faced and what God had done to them. Here's what it says in Amos chapter 2, verse 9. But as my people watched, I destroyed the Amorites, though they were as tall as cedars. That's pretty big. And as strong as oaks. That's pretty strong. I destroyed the fruit of their branches and dug out their roots. Biblical scholars list these Amorites, these particular Amorites, as one of the groups of giants that are mentioned in the Bible. And evidently these giants lived in the mountain regions of Israel, and they appeared as tall as cedars. Like I said, that's pretty tall. And as strong as oak trees. Okay. If they'd only been trees, that would have been welcomed and helpful. But they were in fact enemies who had a particularly cruel and harmful attack on the people of God. And what I want to suggest to you today, that there is a giant that can make itself look harmless as the trees that adorn our neighborhoods, but are in fact dangerous enemies whose fruit must be avoided and whose root must be destroyed. I call this one the covert giant on so many blocks. The covert giant. And maybe it's hiding in your backyard, and I want you to consider that today. So who is this giant? What is this? Well, to explain that, I want you to find now a New Testament passage. I want you to find the book of Hebrews in your New Testament. You got to get through all the Gospels, letters of Paul. You're going to finally get to Hebrews. Okay? In Hebrews chapter 12, I find the writer of Hebrews exposing the covert giant using a similar metaphor and similar image that Amos did in his book to describe the Amorite giants. Okay? And as you locate Hebrews 12, let me give you a little bit of context for these words. They're a part of a letter that was written to some people who were really struggling. Can you imagine that? People who were struggling. They were frustrated at their culture and at people who seemed to have turned against them. You ever had anybody turn against you, it felt like? Okay, let's just make sure we're all in the same room here. You ever had anybody seem to turn against you in your life? Can I see your hand? Has that ever happened to anybody in here? Did it happen today on the way to the church, okay? It happens. And they felt like their friends, their culture had turned against them. And suddenly they found out that this Jesus thing wasn't going to be as easy as they thought it was going to be. And some of them were actually considering giving it up. Forget this Jesus way of treating people. I won't do it anymore. And into that context, the author penned these words. He wrote, work at living in peace with everyone and work at living a holy life. For those who are not holy will not see the Lord. Folks, if you want to see the Lord show up in your family, do you? If you want to see the Lord show up in your house, in your home, you want to see the Lord show up at your job, in your school, if you want to see the Lord show up in your friendships, well, then you're going to work. You're going to have some work to do. you're going to have to work at creating an atmosphere of peace and holiness. That's what he's saying. Well, how do we do that? Keep reading. You look after each other. Because there's one thing that'll thwart the grace of God. If there's one thing that will cause you and others to fail to experience the grace of God, if there's one thing that'll poison you and those around you, it's the root of bitterness. You see it there? Because when it grows, oh my, it inflicts trouble and corrupts. The writer uses the same horticultural image as Amos did, okay? When he described those Amorite giants that had caused so much havoc for the people of God. He uses the image of trees and roots. Again, things that appear harmless. I mean, look at them out the side the window there. They're beautiful. They don't seem harmful, do you? Unless they're falling through your roof. And they appear harmless, they appear welcome, but they are in fact deadly and dangerous. And I want to suggest to you that the covert giant on so many blocks, hiding in plain sight, is the one that the writer of Hebrews exposes so clearly as the giant of bitterness. Let's talk about it. I think bitterness is something most of us understand. I think we do. We can recognize, at least I think we can recognize it when it comes to our taste buds. I mean, as kids, we look at certain foods and go, ew, that's going to taste terrible. I don't want to eat it, right? Well, I was away with my grandkids here for the last few days. It was great because we were trying to cook something and go, I don't want that. But then taste it and go, ooh, that's good, that's good. And it can surprise us, right? We thought it was going to be bad, but it comes out okay. But it's true that the opposite can also be the case. Example. An apple. Nothing better than to bite into a sweet, tasty apple, right? Have I got you hungry yet? I mean, a beautiful, delicious apple. And nothing worse than biting into one and it's bitter and tart. You ever done that? In that moment, you sure hope nobody is taking your picture, right? Have you ever been in something? Oh, dear Lord, please don't let somebody be taking my picture. Because the face of bitterness is not very attractive, is it? Let me say that again. The face of bitterness is not very attractive, is it? And yet so many people, including us, wear that face today and don't even recognize when we're doing it. We don't even recognize it. It comes when we experience something painful, something distasteful, something offensive, some kind of wrong. That was wrong. That was so wrong, God. When something happens, it just seems that whether it was real or perceived, it's wrong. And that wrong just creates a bitterness. And though we're really good at spotting that in other people, though we can even spot it in our food maybe, I just tend to think we're oblivious to it when we're indulging it in our souls. So can we talk? Biblical term for bitterness is pikros, which comes from a word that simply means to wound by piercing or to be sharp like an arrow. And it refers to something that is pungent to the taste or disagreeable to the soul. Okay, can we all agree that life has many blessings, but there are bitter moments that do pierce our hearts? Can we agree with that? Ever been wronged? Okay, let's just take a poll. Have you ever been wronged at any point in your life yet? If you're too young, listen, if you can't raise your hand, see me after church, I'll take care of that for you, okay? I mean, really. Person sitting next to you didn't raise your hand, poke them. I mean, wrong them, do something. You ever been taken advantage of? Have you ever been disappointed? You ever been disrespected? You ever been hurt? Have you ever experienced a sudden loss or a serious illness or an unexpected hardship or an irreversible damage? Well, here's the thing. Those wrongs can lead to this thing called bitterness. And it can do it without us even realizing it. Here's the thing. Bitterness acts on our minds and our emotions the way poison acts on the body. It corrodes. It eats things away. It corrupts. But again, the thing about this attack is it can be so covert, like a root under the surface. You don't see anything on the top. Everything looks fine on the surface, but there's poison down below. And it will defeat you, and keep you from all the things God wants for you in your life, just like the enemy planned. So, anybody willing to face this attack and do something about it? Maybe for us to be able to do that, I think the place to begin is, or to continue, is to recognize how this giant attacks. I want us to make sure you recognize how it attacks and go, oh, that's what's happening here. That's what's going on here. So go back to what the writer of Hebrews says about it. Let me show you something about the tactics of this attack and the evidence that you're being attacked. The tactics that this giant uses to attack you and the evidence that, boy, it's in you. Okay? Let's begin with the tactics the giant uses to sneak in our lives and attack. He says in verse 15, watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up. Okay, here's the image. He's giving you the image of a seed, a root, and then some fruit. A seed, a root, and then fruit. It all begins with a seed that gets planted. A poisonous seed. See the word poisonous there? And that is the offense that occurred. Write down the word offense if you're taking notes. Hope you are. It's the offense that happened. Just in case nobody told you, I just need to let you know something today. Here's a fact of the universe. Offense happens. Okay? I know the bumper sticker uses a different word, but offense happens. I mean, it's a part of life. Every day, life presents more than enough opportunities to be offended. True? I mean, it could be something as simple as somebody cutting you off when you try to get out of our grass parking lot over here today. I mean, it could be something a little more harsh, like a biting or a caustic word that gets hurled at you at work tomorrow. It could be a fight you had with a family member, or a betrayal you faced from a coworker or a friend, or it could be a wound that you faced, an emotional, psychological, relational wound, or even a physical wound, physical wound. Offense happens. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small, sometimes they're somewhere in between. But we've all been wrong. Jesus said it this way. Here's one of those you want to say, Jesus, you could have left that one out of there. He said, it is impossible, but that offenses will come. Folks, it's impossible for offense not to happen, is what Jesus said. It's going to happen. But that's the opening. That's the opening that the enemy uses to attack. Because the moment that offense occurs, this giant sneaks in to plant its poisonous seed in your heart. And in that moment, you got a choice to make. You can discard that seed, not going to do that, or you can let it take root in your heart, in your mind, in your soul. A seed, a root. And that root is through something called resentment. Write that word down, resentment. Resentment is the natural response to offense. Hey, nobody likes to be offended. Nobody likes to be wronged, okay? It's wrong to wrong, so we resent that. But that resentment is how that poisonous seed of offense takes root. If you don't do anything to get rid of this poison, it will take root. And we've all done this. Let me explain it this way. Every one of us have a ledger in our minds. If you don't know a ledger is a sheet of paper or a computer program where you keep records. And they use them to do accounting. They use them to do a lot of things. But it's a ledger. You write it down. And whenever, by the way, the biblical term for resentment is an accounting term. It's taking a ledger. It's keeping a record of it. That's what it means. We've all have a ledger. And when somebody wounds us, somebody wrongs us, somebody offends us, well, it goes in the ledger. It goes in the ledger. It goes in the ledger. I remember this terrible story about a husband who came into his pastor to counsel about their struggling marriage, let's put it that way. And he said, every time we get in an argument, she gets historical. And the pastor said, what you meant was hysterical. He said, no, I mean historical. She brings up every single thing I've ever done. Why is that? Because it went in the ledger. It went in the ledger. Resentment is offense multiplied by time. If we don't deal with the offense, resentment will root that offense deep into our hearts. If you don't deal with the resentment, it'll compound over time. It will add to the ledger and add to the ledger until it turns into bitterness. There's where it is, bitterness. That's what grows up and shows up, according to the writer of Hebrews. Bitterness, I would say, is resentment on fertilizer, okay? A seed, a root, and then the fruit. Archibald Hart, a Christian psychologist, once called bitterness the cancer of all emotions. It's a poison that gets planted by an offense, a wrong. It gets fertilized over time by resentment until it finally becomes a toxic root that bears its fruit. What's my point? My point is this: bitterness left unchecked will take root and then it'll take over. Do you hear that? Bitterness is a root. Left unchecked, it'll take root and then it'll take over. It's kind of like, anybody else have weeds in your yard? You know, my daughter keeps trying to tell me they're pretty flowers. No, those are not flowers. Those are weeds. Anybody else get weeds in your yard? You know, when they start in there, if you don't do anything about them, they will take over your yard. Anybody ever had a yard that no longer had any grass? All it had was weeds? Can I get a witness? Because if, you know, it takes root, left unchecked, it takes over. And all of a sudden, you don't even have any grass left. All you've got is weeds. Well, the fruit of this root is the evidence that you're under attack. Can we talk? The fruit of this root is the evidence that bitterness has taken over in your life. So I find that evidence back in Hebrews 12 again. So notice he says, watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. Okay. Two evidences of the attack of bitterness in my life and yours, okay? It's us. Trouble is the first. It inflicts trouble as it infects. Bitterness will inflict trouble as it infects us. The term used for trouble here literally means to crowd in, okay? It gives the image of a poison that works its way into the system and infects it. Listen to me, bitterness will poison our relationships with others. You notice, if you don't know that, please hear me. Bitterness, when it gets into my life, when it gets into your life, it will infect and poison our relationships with other people. If you haven't learned it yet, have you ever noticed that one bitter person can divide a whole family? One bitter person can destroy the small group. Oh man, that's the end of that one. One bitter family can infect an entire congregation. And one bitter employee can infect an entire workplace. Now, anybody ever experienced any of those? The answer is, I think, most all of us. Bitterness just causes so many troubles in our relationships. They do. And if you're someone who gets angry and bitter and you're sharing that with others, then over time, people are not going to want to be around you. Anybody? When I was doing this, all of a sudden I'm thinking, anybody besides me, all of a sudden faces and names came into your mind of people you try to avoid? Okay? Bitterness poisons our relationships with others, and then catch this, bitterness poisons others in our relationships. Study after study that I looked at in preparation for this lesson stated that bitterness infects not just the bitter person, but those who are in contact with that bitter person. Your bitterness about your ex-spouse, for example, will infect your kids. Your bitterness about your job or your boss will infect your coworkers. Hopefully this won't get spread. You got to promise you'll not share this, but there are days, man, I got to say this carefully. There are days that I intentionally do not sit at a certain table in the cafeteria to eat my lunch, because I know that I have been exposed to the poison coming out of the mouths just more than I should. And I got to take a break from it. Can I say that carefully? Bitterness is a poison. It poisons our relationships with others, but then it poisons others in our relationships. It infects as it inflicts. I read this week about a guy who was bitten by a dog. That's not funny. I shouldn't laugh at this. But he was bitten by a dog, and later they found out the dog was rabid. Okay? You ever heard of rabies, dogs, and so forth? Hospital test confirmed it. The guy had contracted rabies from the dog bite. But this was back when there was no cure for it. Most of you don't realize this, but there was a time and a day when there was no cure for rabies. And if you got it, you died. There was nothing that could be done. And sure enough, the doctor came to the man and told him that I'm sorry, but you've got rabies, and you know there's nothing we can do. Everything possible will be done to keep you comfortable, but we can't offer any false hope. My best advice to you is you need to put your affairs in order as soon as possible. And the guy was a little bit shocked at that point. Who wouldn't be? And he got a little sad, but then all of a sudden he asked for a pen and some paper from the doctor, and then he began to write furiously, and so the doctor left him alone. An hour later, he comes back in. The guy is still writing, and the doctor said, I am so glad to see you've taken my advice. I assume that's your will you're writing. He says, oh, no, this is no will. This is a list of people I'm going to bite before I die. What's the point? Bitterness is a toxin that infects as it inflicts. There's another piece of evidence. It causes so much trouble. That's the trouble. The other piece of evidence that this giant of bitterness might be attacking in your life. Remember the verse? Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows in to trouble you and what? Corrupt many. See that word, corrupt, corrupting many? The term for corrupt there literally means to stain. As in you dyed something, you stained a cloth, you stained something, and it turned a different color. Here's the point. Bitterness stains as it corrupts. It takes that which was pure and it stains it. It's kind of like my grandkids I spent the week with. I could tell what they ate for lunch by just looking at their shirt. I mean, really, right? And you can do that with some of us, too. Can we be honest? I mean, it stains. It stains. Bitterness stains our perspective. It makes it to where offense is all we can see. Psychologists tell us that bitterness and resentment grow out of a very selective version we have of the past. Follow this. It stains our perspective is what I'm trying to say. What we tend to do is we look at what's happened in our lives through a very colored lens, if you will. A very carefully watched over lens. Our perspective is colored such that we don't recognize our own mistakes and what went wrong, and the extent to which our own decisions and our own conduct were responsible for what happened and the unhappiness. See, we'd rather see ourselves as victims than as the authors of our own misery, thank you. That stained, colored perspective becomes the lens through which we see others and we see ourselves. Let me give you an example of that. Probably one of the most important morsels of wisdom I was ever given as a leader, a church, a pastor. I was in one of my doctoral studies classes in San Jose, California, and I'll never forget the guy who said this, because when he said it, I just stopped and was stunned because I thought, oh my goodness. He said, have you ever noticed that the world is divided between the righteous and the unrighteous? Make sense? He said, you ever notice that the world gets divided between the righteous and the unrighteous? But have you ever noticed it's always the righteous who get to do that dividing? And if you didn't follow that, what he's saying is people see themselves as right and they divide other people off they say is wrong, as the unrighteous. And I got that down because it's so true that we live in a world, we tend to live our world by dividing people up between the righteous and the unrighteous. And if we see ourselves as the righteous and we divide off the unrighteous. But in that world, there's only self-righteousness, folks. There's only self-righteousness. But here's what happens. Here's what happens. I'm talking about perspective. When we have divided somebody off because they wronged us, we divide them off, then nothing they do from then on is right because they're not righteous. You see that? Suddenly, everything they say is wrong. Everything they do is wrong. Okay, is this making sense to anybody besides Russell? When suddenly somebody that has wronged you, all you can think, everything they do is wrong, and you feel like, then that means that the giant has pretty well snuck in. And that's evidence that bitterness has taken over in your life. Because it's not everything they say and everything they do. Just most of it, okay? Just most. Oh, come on, lighten up, would you? Bitterness has a way of staining our perspective. It also stains our heart. Poison bitterness can foster negative emotions, leading to anger, anxiety, depression. Study after study after study reveals how bitterness left unresolved can have a lasting emotional and mental impact that prevents us from ever sensing peace or happiness. We live a life of despair and hopelessness. It stains our hearts. It stains our souls. Bitterness not only poisons our relationships with others, folks, it poisons our relationship with God. That's why I'm calling it a giant that comes between you and what God has for you. It hinders our spiritual maturity. It comes between us and God's plans and promises. I don't need to belabor what we all know. Bitterness is a burden that only takes us down. Bitterness is a burden that only takes us down. When we feel wronged, betrayed, offended, and fail to deal with that, bitterness takes root and produces its fruit. And that bitterness never makes us better. It just takes us down. So let me remind you something you already know, but we need to be reminded of it occasionally. You cannot control what happens to you. However, you can control how you respond. You respond to what happens to you. You cannot control what happens to you. However, you can control how you respond to offense when it happens. Some people, when offense happens, they simply repress it, okay? And that usually turns into depression and despair and hopelessness, and watch out for that. Other people, they just rehearse it. They talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and that usually turns into anger and revenge. But you do have another choice. You can release it. And that's what brings us to what conquers this giant. I want to spend what little time I've got left real quickly showing you how to conquer this giant. Hebrews 12, one more time. A strategy, biblical strategy for conquering this. He says, work at living at peace with everyone and work at living a holy life. For those who are not holy will not see the Lord. The term translated there, work, means to pursue with an intention of driving it away. And that tells me that the very first step to conquering this giant is you got to expose it, people. You got to expose it. You got to go after this one. You can't ignore it. You can't let it hide in the backyard of your heart. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take work, but you got to expose that bitter root for what it is. Now, for some of us, that's going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward because that thing that you're bitter about is something that should never have offended you in the first place. And when you expose it, you're going to go, well, that's dumb. It's just me. It's going to be awkward for some. For some, it's going to be difficult. Because the thing that wronged you, you're sitting next to. Or you have to live under the same address with them. Or work with them. And you got to face them. And it's going to be awkward. It's going to be difficult. But for some of you, hear this, it's going to feel like it's impossible. Because the thing that was wrong, they're gone. They're dead. You can't change that. Job's gone. You got fired. It's over. There's no change in that. Okay? It's impossible to reverse any of it. And it's going to feel like it's impossible to deal with the bitterness over it. Conquering bitterness takes work. It takes time. But the first step is to expose it. You cannot heal that from which you're not willing to admit. You cannot defeat what you will not define. So fill in the blank. Lord, I'm bitter because of. Fill it in. Fill it in. Lord, I'm bitter because of. And ask the Lord to expose the roots of bitterness that have been planted in your heart. Because that's the only way to take the next step, which is to cut it off. Expose it, then cut it. Just like a root in the yard. Once you expose it, then you've got to cut that thing out of there. So listen to Hebrews 12 again. And let me show you something. Work at living in peace with everyone. Work at living a holy life. For those who are not holy will not see the Lord. Okay, I want God to show up. I want to see him in my family. I want to see him in my work. I want to see him in my ministry. Okay, I want to see God. Well, okay, that peace and that holiness only come from God. And because, you know what? Until I'm at peace with God, I don't experience God's peace. Until I let God deal with my unholiness, I'll never experience his holiness. So I'm going to need a whole lot of help from God on this. Right? Well, here's what I see. The one thing that you're going to, the antidote to bitterness is something you're going to have to get from God. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is the antidote to bitterness. And you need God to make that happen. Forgiveness is the antidote to bitterness, and you're going to need God to make that happen. I suspect that the biblical image of forgiveness. Let me do this first of all. If you remember something from me, would you remember this? I want you to take your hands in front of you and turn them, hands stretched out, palms down. That is the biblical image of forgiveness. That's why sometimes it's translated forgiveness, and sometimes it's translated let it go. Because what can you hold on to in your hands right now? Nothing. You can put your hands down. That's the image in the Bible, what forgiveness is. You got to let it go. You can't hold on to it. To conquer bitterness, hear me, you got to let it go. Let it go. I suspect a lot of you want that. You want to cut the bitterness out of your life. You want to get rid of it, but you don't think you can do that. You don't think you can do anything about it because you feel it's that somebody who wronged you that's going to have to do something about it. They're the ones who owe. They're the ones who did wrong. They've got to do something about it for this to be fixed. I mean, at least they can apologize about it sincerely. They got to do something about it. And so you go, nothing going to be done until they do something about it. Hear me. Forgiveness is a one-player game. It's not a two-player game. You guys know what two-player games are. It's a one-player game. It's just you. You let it go. It's not them. It's you. You let it go. Whether they say anything ever, whether they even realize, whether they're even willing to, hey, you let it go. And especially those things that you can't, there's nobody to do that. It's going to be up to you. One-player game. Let it go. Again, it's especially true of those for whom it's not someone that's wronged you, it's something that's wronged you. It was an illness, it was an accident, it was the death of a loved one. And there's nothing that can be done about that. There's no making that right. So it's up to you to let it go. But that's going to take grace, isn't it? Oh, man. That's going to take help from God. So go to Him first. Go to God and live under the incredible healing flow of His grace and forgiveness. And those experiences, fresh experiences of God's forgiving grace, by the way, psychologists have proven this to us. It's fresh experiences of God's forgiving grace that make us more forgiving of others. So if you're struggling to forgive that person, just go to God and remember, God, forgive me. And the fresh experience of forgiveness from Him will make you more forgiving. Discover how that can work in your life. One psychologist put it this way. So many of us have a picture we live with. A photograph, if you will. It's the picture of the perfect life, or the perfect family, the perfect job, the perfect home, the perfect mate. And then you take the job. Then you buy the house. Oh, Lord. Then you marry that person and find out, I didn't realize this. All of a sudden, this is not this is not what I signed up for. And at that moment, you got a choice to make. You can embrace the picture and tear up the family and tear up the coworker and tear up the house. You can embrace the picture and tear others up, or you can tear up the picture and embrace the others. You get it? You got a choice to make. But it's going to take grace to let it go. Tear it up, let it go. Instead of tearing them up. Now, if that wasn't hard enough, and I bet you wish I would be shut up and be done, there is one more step here to finally defeating this giant of bitterness. And you don't want to hear this one, so you might just start doing your to-do list. Because there's one step, and final step is this. Cutting it out and releasing it only makes it possible to take the final step to conquering it, and that is to replace it. Replace it. Right there, I'm going to try to explain this. You dug it up. You exposed it. Good. You cut it off. Released it. Great. You still got a hole. Right? Still got a hole sitting there. And what are you going to do about that? Well, you need to fill it in. Because if you don't, you're going to have a hole there, a void there, then just inviting somebody else to trip and fall into it. Or fall into it yourself. So notice what the writer of Hebrews tells us to fill in that hole with and replace the bitterness. Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Here's how you do it. Forgiving it, releasing it is what covers you with the grace of God and makes it possible for you to forgive others. But then it makes it possible for you to take that same grace and bless others. Okay, follow me here, please, God. Help me to do this. It's not just a matter of I expose the fact I struggle with bitterness. And I say, okay, I'm going to let it go, I'm going to let it go, I'm going to let it go. You want to really conquer this giant? You choose to bless whatever it was that wronged you, whoever it was that wronged you. Bless them. Share grace so that they don't fail to receive God's grace. Jesus put it this way. But to you who are willing to listen, if you can handle it, he says, I love this one. Jesus says, if you can handle it, I say love those enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who cursed you, who wronged you. Pray for those who hurt you. I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds counterproductive. That's why so few people do it. That's why this giant keeps sneaking into our backyards. But when I choose to bless those who've wronged me, I take the weapon right out of the hands of the giant of bitterness. When I choose to bless those who've wronged me, I take the weapons right out of the hands of the giant of bitterness. Now, confessions time. I hate this one, God. I had finished working on this lesson. Got it all together. Sounds good. I think it'll be okay. And I had to run an errand and go to the grocery store. And so I went into the grocery store and ran smack dab into this giant. I ran smack dab into somebody who reminded me immediately, and it's one of those triggers, brought right back to one of the worst wrongs that I've ever faced in my life. The one that my wife died feeling the pain over. She could not believe that had been done to us. And I ran smack dab into a reminder of it. Here I'm working on this lesson, and poof, right there it is. And I will confess, in that moment, guess what just welled right back up inside of me? Those feelings. Those emotions. But I went, okay then, Lord, here it is. I'm going to expose it for what it is. That bitterness is just, it's attacking right now. This giant is attacking me right now, Lord. So I choose in this moment to forgive. I want to let it go. I want to let it go again. Make sure my hands are open, God. Pry them loose if you have to. I want to let it go. And then I entered into it. I literally walked out of that place, grocery store, praying for people who had, and asking God to bless them. And bless them and their kids and what they're going. God bless them. Do something. I spent time blessing them in prayer and thinking, and Lord, what else could I do to bless them possibly? Because I want to defeat this giant. I don't want this one living in my backyard. Because it is the covert giant that shows up in so many families and so many lives. And I dare say you know exactly that it showed up in yours. Is anybody willing to pray and ask God to start defeating it in your life? Let's talk to God. Father, I realize that I approached this one instead of with a trowel and a spade. I think I approached it with an excavator and just really made a mess of this. But I do hope that somehow today the truth that you have presented to us, that I fumbled and stumbled my way through, will we'll be bringing to light. We'll find a way to bring the light on, shine the light on what's something we all fight and don't realize it. Because we've all been wronged. It's impossible for offense not to happen. Jesus, you said that. Wish you hadn't, but it's true. It's going to happen. God, what am I going to do about it? I do not want, this is Russell now, Lord, I don't want the root of bitterness producing its fruit in my life. I don't want it staining me. I don't want it troubling me. So God, I pray again today. I want to let go. I want to let go of the offenses. I want to let them go. And I want to ask you to show your grace to bless and defeat this giant in my life. And for others who might want to pray that way, God, I just ask you to help them. Help them to expose it. Help them to be honest. I still feel bitterness about it. I still fight with that. And God talked to you about what they're battling in that bitterness so that you can defeat it in their lives. Because, God, we don't want it corrupting and infecting their family, their friends, their coworkers. So, God, teach us. And teach us early. Don't let it have to be as late as life for me to now finally figure this one out. Teach us early how to defeat this giant, I pray. So, God, thanks for everybody who made it here today. Those online, those in the room. Somehow I pray that you will let your grace, your goodness, once again cover them. Once again, love on us, God. May we go from this place realizing, wow, you really care enough about me that you're willing to take on even these things in my life. Do it, God, with power and with love is what I ask. In Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, guys, have a beautiful day. And be nice to each other going out. Don't give somebody a reason to get bitter.